A black teenager walks into a luxury car dealership, excited to pick out his first car. But immediately, the manager looks at him with a gaze full of contempt. With a cold tone, she tries to usher him out without asking a single question, because to her, he doesn't belong there. But what she doesn't know is that he is the son of the dealership's owner. When the truth is revealed, who will be the one shown the door? A valuable lesson in respect awaits. At 16, Jordan is no ordinary teenager. He is the son of David Carter, a successful businessman and owner of the city's most luxurious car dealership, Luxury Motors. With his father's reputation and status, Jordan could easily walk in, pick out the best car, and drive away without a worry in the world. But he doesn't want that. He wants to experience buying a car like any regular customer. No special treatment, no looks of admiration from the staff, no familiar flattery. He wants to see how they'll treat him if they don't know who he is. Jordan's car slowly pulls up in front of Luxury Motors, a sleek glass building right in the heart of the city. From a distance, he can already see the shiny sports cars, the luxury SUVs neatly parked out front. Dream cars, and today he's going to drive one of them home. He takes a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the large sign. Luxury Motors, where class defines value. A slogan that sounds flashy, but will they truly treat every customer fairly here? Jordan isn't dressed like a rich kid. He deliberately chose a black hoodie, simple jeans, and an old pair of sneakers. No expensive brand logos, no flashy watch, no sign of him being the child of a millionaire. Today, he's just Jordan Carter, a black teenager wanting to buy a car. He pushes the car door open, steps out, and stands there for a moment, taking in the scene before him. Excitement surges in his chest. This is the moment he's been waiting for. Jordan tightens his thin leather wallet in his pocket. Inside is all the money he's saved up over the years. Part from his part-time job, part from the savings his parents promised to support when he was old enough to buy a car. He's done his research, tested several models, and reviewed his budget. Today, he's ready. But is this dealership ready to welcome him? Jordan steps forward, reaches for the glass door handle of the showroom, pulls it open, and walks inside. And little does he know, this trip won't be as smooth as he thought. The world around Jordan seemed to freeze for a moment. The lively chatter that had been echoing just moments ago quickly faded into an uncomfortable silence, and he could feel the shift in the atmosphere the instant he walked in. No more casual glances or warm greetings as a regular customer. Now, it was replaced with scrutinizing, judgmental stares, as if he was an outsider in their world. Inside the showroom, the gleaming sports cars were lined up neatly under the bright overhead lights, their reflections shimmering on the vast glass surfaces, exuding an air of opulence and luxury. This was a place for the wealthy, the successful entrepreneurs, the powerful. According to the staff here, Jordan didn't belong in this world. He held his composure as Elena Whitmore, a woman radiating power, approached him. Dressed in a sleek gray suit, her blonde hair neatly tied back, her sharp eyes hidden behind delicate mascara. Everything about her exuded the air of someone who was always in control, or at least thought she was. Her smile remained on her lips, but her eyes spoke volumes. It wasn't a smile of someone genuinely wanting to help a customer. It was a subtle mockery mixed with a hint of pity. Her voice rang out, emphasizing each word with a tone that was soft but laced with meaning. "What do you need here?" Jordan immediately recognized the contempt hidden behind what seemed like a polite question. No welcome, no genuine interest, only an instant judgment based on his appearance. The way she looked at him, as if his presence here was a mistake. He didn't rush to respond, simply looking her in the eye, keeping his voice steady, not a hint of hesitation. "I want to buy a car." Elena blinked once, but quickly regained her composure. She studied him again, this time more thoroughly, from head to toe, as if reassessing whether this was a joke. A black kid, wearing a hoodie and old sneakers, saying he wanted to buy a car at Luxury Motors. She let out a slight laugh, her smile now sharper, as if testing the seriousness of his words. "Is that so? A car? How interesting." Elena crossed her arms, tilted her head slightly, her eyes glinting with amusement, but not in a positive way. She was testing him, seeing how he would react to her clear skepticism. "But cars here are quite expensive, you know." Jordan didn't change his expression, but deep inside he felt a surge of frustration. He had expected to be judged, but he hadn't anticipated it to be so blatant and public. "Yes, I know," he replied, his tone calm but firmer. "I've done my research on the car I want." Elena's demeanor remained unchanged. It seemed she didn't care much for what he said, as in her mind Jordan had already been placed in a certain box, a kid with no money, not part of the clientele she wanted to serve. "Is that so?" she said, dragging out the words, as if speaking to a child with big dreams. "Maybe you'd prefer the used car section." This time, Jordan could feel his blood beginning to boil. Oh, there was no doubt left. Elena didn't see him as a real customer. She was simply trying to politely get rid of him. "I didn't ask about used cars." Jordan emphasized each word, his gaze never leaving hers. "I want to see the new models." Elena chuckled softly, but the laugh wasn't friendly. If she had been trying to be polite before, now the sarcasm was evident in her tone. "Kid, these cars cost hundreds of thousands of dollars," she said, shaking her head slightly, as if trying to help him snap back to reality. "Are you sure you've saved enough from delivering newspapers?" A loaded remark, hitting at his background. No more subtle hints about used cars. This was a firm declaration that he could never afford a car here. In that moment, Jordan realized that the racial discrimination was clearer than ever. He didn't immediately show signs of embarrassment or anger. Instead, he took a deep breath, feeling each beat of his heart pound in his chest. He had heard stories like this, witnessed black people being judged just because of their skin color. But today, it wasn't just a distant story. It was happening right in front of him. He clenched his fist lightly, but his tone remained unnervingly calm. "What are you thinking, Miss Whitmore?" Elena seemed slightly surprised when Jordan addressed her by name, but then she raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms and enjoying the sight of this kid not being easily intimidated. "Guess," she said, a smirk curling at the edge of her lips. Jordan was silent for a moment, then slowly stepped back, not out of fear, but to observe her more closely. "I guess you think I don't have the money," he said slowly, his voice full of meaning. "And you're trying to find the nicest way to get rid of me." Elena gave a faint smile, but didn't deny it. She merely shrugged, as if acknowledging the truth without feeling guilty. And in that moment, Jordan understood that this battle was only just beginning. Jordan took a deep breath, trying to contain the surge of emotions building in his chest. He no longer had to guess. Elena didn't see him as a real customer. She looked at him not with the eyes of a salesperson trying to assist, but with the gaze of someone considering whether to throw him out of there. She shrugged lightly, as if her previous words were indisputable, as if it were an obvious truth. That a black boy in plain clothes could never afford to buy a car here. Jordan could feel the discomfort growing more apparent in every gesture Elena made. Her eyes gleamed with impatience, her arms still crossed over her chest, and her facial expression gradually shifted from mockery to clear disdain. "Look, kid," she said, her voice soft but sharp, each word emphasizing like a lesson she was trying to teach. I've been doing this job long enough to tell who's a real customer and who's just wasting my time. Jordan locked eyes with Elena, his calm demeanor only making her discomfort grow more evident. "Oh, really?" he responded, not backing down. "And you decided that just by looking at my clothes?" Elena let out a small laugh, a mocking and self-assured smile. "It's not just the clothes, it's the way you walked in here, the way you speak, and most importantly—" She paused for a moment, her gaze drifting to his old sneakers. "The way you clearly don't belong here." Each of her words felt like a sharp blade piercing Jordan's self-respect, but instead of stepping back, he felt his determination rise even stronger. "Interesting," Jordan said, smirking as he slowly glanced at her name tag. "Ms. Whitmore, I guess this dealership runs more on your gut feeling than on actual facts, right?" Elena blinked for a second, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged by a teenager. But she quickly regained her composure. "I'm just trying to save you some time," she said, her voice smooth but laced with meaning. "The cars here start at $100,000 or more. I don't want you to be disappointed when you realize you can't afford one." Jordan could feel the eyes of others on him. Some employees in the showroom were watching from a distance, but no one intervened. Other customers glanced in their direction, but only to see what was going on, not truly caring. And that was the thing that bothered him the most. No one thought it was wrong for a salesperson to look down on him just because of his appearance. No one seemed surprised that a black boy in a hoodie was immediately doubted the moment he walked in, because to them, this was normal. Jordan slowly moved closer, his gaze never leaving Elena. The way he looked at her made her hesitate, but only for a second. "Guess what?" he said, his voice low and slow, each word seeming to drown out her arrogance. "Do you even know what you just did?" Elena raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "I don't know what you're talking about." Jordan nodded slightly, then pointed to a middle-aged man in a pricey suit standing near the SUV section. "He just walked into the showroom 5 minutes ago, wearing a fancy suit. You didn't ask him if he could afford it." Elena fell silent. Jordan continued, his tone no longer soft but biting with challenge. "You didn't advise him to go to the used car section. You didn't mock him, and for sure, you didn't ask if he'd saved up enough from delivering newspapers." The atmosphere in the room suddenly felt stifling. Some employees began to feel uneasy, their curious gazes intensifying. A young employee at the front desk nervously swallowed, clearly uncomfortable with what was happening. Elena looked at Jordan, but this time, the smugness in her eyes had lessened. However, she still maintained her calm exterior, as though nothing serious was happening. "What exactly are you trying to make of this?" she asked, her tone becoming more impatient. Jordan smirked, a smile with no humor at all. "I'm just pointing out a fact that I think you're well aware of." Elena pursed her lips, and for the first time in this conversation she couldn't come up with a fitting response. Jordan crossed his arms, calm as if he had complete control over the situation. He tilted his head, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "So, what are you going to do next, Miss Whitmore? I still want to look at cars, but if you find that too uncomfortable, feel free to protect the premium image of this showroom by throwing me out." This time, there was a hint of hesitation in Elena's eyes. Clearly, she didn't want to make a scene, but at the same time, she didn't want to back down to a black kid who, in her mind, could never afford a car here. Jordan could see that clearly, and he knew. This was just the beginning. Jordan kept his hand on the door handle, his gaze calm, but his mind was boiling. He didn't look at Elena immediately, but slowly scanned the showroom, as if evaluating a ridiculous performance unfolding before his eyes. Right there, just a few steps away from him, a middle-aged white couple was comfortably opening the door to an SUV, chatting with each other cheerfully. No one stopped them. No staff member stood nearby to supervise, and no one said they needed permission to touch the car. But Jordan wasn't allowed. He smirked and turned back to face Elena. Why are they allowed to touch the car, and I'm not? That question hit Elena directly where she was trying to maintain control. For a brief moment she froze, not because she didn't have an answer, but because she never expected him to point out the injustice right in front of everyone. But then, like someone used to hiding her biases beneath a professional mask, Elena quickly regained her composure. She cleared her throat, kept her arms crossed over her chest, and her cold gray eyes glanced over the sports car that Jordan was touching. I just want to make sure everything is handled professionally. Her voice was calm, almost kind, but that only made her words seem more venomous. Jordan didn't back down. He stared directly at her, his eyes sharp. So, does that mean I'm not professional? He asked, deliberately stretching the words, as if forcing her to confront an undeniable truth. Elena gave a thin smile, but it wasn't warm. It was more like a warning. That's not it, she said slowly, then tilted her head, her eyes full of meaning. But usually, customers who can afford to buy cars here don't touch them casually before being shown how to do so. Jordan could feel every word she emphasized. Customers who can afford it. A phrase that seemed innocent enough but carried all the contempt she didn't need to say aloud. He knew Elena was trying to maintain the image of a professional manager, not wanting anyone to accuse her of openly discriminating. But he didn't need her to say it. The truth was already crystal clear. He knew it, she knew it, and everyone else standing around knew it. Jordan clicked his tongue lightly, as if enjoying a dull joke. He crossed his arms, fully relaxed, as if not at all affected by her words, and that only made Elena more uncomfortable. Professional? He repeated, his tone laced with sarcasm. So, potential customers aren't allowed to touch the cars unless they look like someone who can afford them. Elena narrowed her eyes, this time unable to hide her discomfort. You're misunderstanding me, she said, her voice starting to lose its patience. I'm just trying to help you save time. Jordan chuckled, a soft but challenging laugh. Help me save time? He raised an eyebrow. So, are you going to give me a list of used cars I can afford? Elena stood still for a moment. He'd hit the mark. She didn't say anything, but her eyes betrayed her thoughts. And in that moment, Jordan understood that she didn't think he had the money to buy a car here. She never had from the very beginning. He tilted his head slightly as if evaluating a problem that had just been solved. I'm just curious, he said, his voice light as air, but there was no patience left in his eyes. How long have you been working here, Miss Whitmore? Elena furrowed her brows. Almost 10 years. Why? Jordan nodded, as if he had already predicted the answer. Then I guess you must have enough experience to spot which customers can afford a car and which ones aren't worth your time, right? Elena froze for a moment, but then she laughed, a laugh full of false cheer. What are you trying to make this into? She asked, her voice drawn out, her eyes beginning to show signs of wariness. Jordan stopped laughing. He stood straight, facing Elena, no more playing around or mocking. I'm just wondering, he said, his voice low and sharp as a knife. If I walked in here wearing an expensive suit, a shiny Rolex, and with lighter skin, would you treat me like this? The entire showroom went silent. Other staff members started looking at each other, some quickly glancing away, as if not wanting to get involved. A few customers quietly stopped, observing the scene with interest. Elena pressed her lips together, and this time, she clearly didn't have an immediate answer. Jordan could feel her unease, and he knew he'd hit a nerve. But instead of admitting it, Elena took a step closer to him, lowering her voice but failing to hide her anger. "Look, kid," she said, her voice icy. "If you're not serious about buying a car, I suggest you leave before I have someone escort you out." Jordan didn't take his eyes off her, his smile gone, and his gaze so cold that it even made Elena pause. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, each word deliberate. "I want to speak with the owner." Elena clicked her tongue, for the first time losing her composure. "The boss doesn't have time for nonsense like this," she replied, her voice clearly holding back her fury. Jordan smirked, pulled out his phone. "I'll call myself." And in that moment he saw Elena's face turn pale. The atmosphere in the showroom seemed to freeze the moment Jordan pulled out his phone and said those words. Elena stood still, her eyes wide for a moment before she tried to regain her composure. But it wasn't easy. Her fingers clenched around her crossed arms, showing that she had just realized how big a mistake she had made. The teenager she had just looked down upon, mocked, and tried to kick out turned out to be the son of the dealership's owner. The other employees in the showroom, who had previously been watching the drama or avoiding the awkward situation, now watched with skeptical and anxious eyes. They began to glance at each other, as if wondering whether they should intervene in this situation. But at this moment, no one dared to step forward. Jordan remained calm, as though he hadn't just said something important. He kept the phone against his ear, never taking his eyes off Elena, watching for the smallest change in her expression. "Dad, I'm at your dealership. There's a small issue." Elena swallowed hard, her eyes narrowing as though she were trying to figure out whether this was a joke. "What? What are you doing?" Her voice no longer sounded as cold and sharp as before. Instead, there was a hint of confusion. Jordan raised an eyebrow, as if the question was meaningless. "Calling the owner," he replied calmly. "You said he doesn't have time for me, so I thought it'd be best to call him myself." Those words hit Elena's pride straight on. She had never felt so out of control. This boy, whom she had dismissed as an outsider, a poor child who shouldn't be there, had more power than she did in the very showroom she managed. She didn't know what to do, and that scared her more than anything else. No one in the showroom dared to breathe loudly. Some employees began to silently step back from the conversation, as if afraid that by standing too close, they would also get pulled into this situation. Other customers who had previously been busy checking out the cars were now pretending to be occupied, but were actually listening in intently to every word. Jordan remained calm, but he could feel the heavy tension spreading throughout the room. He didn't need to say anything more. He just needed to stand there, hold the phone, and wait for the storm to hit. And it came faster than he expected. The large glass door of the showroom suddenly swung open and a man appeared. David Carter didn't need to say a word to silence everyone. He was a black man in his 40s, tall and imposing, with a powerful presence and sharp eyes. The black suit he wore was perfectly tailored, and every step he took in his polished leather shoes made a soft clicking sound on the showroom floor. As soon as he walked in, a wave of tension swept through the room. The employees who had been watching the drama unfold now stood as still as statues, none of them daring to slack off. Elena turned pale, but she still tried to maintain a professional facade, a desperate attempt to protect her image. David didn't speak immediately. He scanned the room as if assessing the situation, then his gaze locked onto Jordan. Jordan gave him a faint smile. "Hey, Dad." David looked at his son for a moment, then slowly turned his head toward Elena. "Miss Whitmore." His voice was deep, slow, but full of authority. Elena swallowed hard, trying to regain her usual professional tone. "Hello, Mr. Carter." She nodded slightly, but Jordan noticed she was clenching her fists to hold back her anxiety. David didn't respond right away. He stared at her, then glanced down at the phone in Jordan's hand, as if to make her figure out what was going on. "I hear there's a problem here?" he asked, his tone still calm but carrying a weight that everyone could feel. Elena paled a little, but still tried to maintain her calm appearance. I'm not sure what the problem is," she said, but her voice no longer had the confidence it had before. "This young man was just here to look at cars, and I was just following protocol." David raised an eyebrow slightly, and Jordan immediately knew that his father didn't believe a word of what she said. He took a deep breath, then slowly walked over to a nearby car, placing his hand on the shiny paint as though he was considering something. Then he turned back to face Elena, his gaze so cold it made her take half a step back. "Do you know who you're standing in front of, Miss Whitmore?" The atmosphere in the showroom seemed to freeze. Elena opened her mouth to speak, but couldn't find the right words. Jordan stepped forward, standing beside his father, arms crossed over his chest, his gaze holding no pity for the woman before them. "Looks like she doesn't know," he said, his voice tinged with a hint of mockery. "Do you want to tell her, Dad?" David looked at his son for a second, then turned back to Elena. "Miss Whitmore," he said, this time his voice lower, slower, and more serious. "The young man you just tried to kick out of this showroom is my son." Elena turned completely pale. Jordan smirked, lowering his head to look at her. "Too bad, huh, Miss Whitmore?" he said quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "You misjudged the situation." The atmosphere in the showroom thickened, as if all the air had been sucked out. The employees stood motionless like statues, while the customers browsing the cars subtly turned their heads, sensing something unusual had just occurred. David Carter, the owner of Luxury Motors, a man whom everyone here respected, was now standing in the middle of the showroom. His presence was commanding, yet understated. Just one glance across the room was enough to bring everything to a halt. Jordan didn't need to say anything else at this moment. He knew his father had seen it all, from Elena's panicked expression to the concerned looks of the staff, and most of all the way everything suddenly became unnervingly quiet the moment he entered. "What's going on, son?" His voice was calm, but beneath that calm was something cold, a storm waiting to break. Jordan didn't rush to answer. He simply stood there, staring at Elena, letting her feel the weight of the consequences of her actions. Elena, the woman who had been so confident and authoritative just moments ago, now stood frozen like a statue. The color had drained from her face, her hands still gripping the clipboard. But now it was no longer a symbol of control. It was something she clung to desperately. No more sharp, condescending glances, no more mocking tone, no more sneering smiles. Only a woman who had just realized she had made a grave mistake. David waited, but he didn't need to ask again. He simply looked at Elena as if silently demanding an explanation. "Mr. Carter." Elena's voice was dry, much quieter than usual. She tried to regain some professionalism, to find an excuse, but even she knew there was no way to salvage this situation. I think there's a misunderstanding here." Jordan smirked, not laughing, but not showing anger either. He had expected this answer. "A misunderstanding?" he repeated, his tone steady but with a strange weight to it. "Miss Whitmore, you seemed so sure just a moment ago. Why is it suddenly a misunderstanding now? Elena pursed her lips, her eyes flickering, but she still tried to hold on to her pride. I was just doing my job, she said, but this time there was no arrogance in her voice. Jordan slowly took a step forward, never breaking eye contact. Your job is what? He asked, his voice unchanged, but the tension in the room seemed to grow. Elena was slightly startled by the question, but quickly responded, as if she had rehearsed this answer her whole life. My job is to ensure that customers are served, in accordance with the standards of luxury motors. Jordan nodded slowly, as if memorizing every word she had just said. So, what are the standards of luxury motors? He asked, and this time, everyone in the showroom could feel the shift in the atmosphere. That question no longer came from a 16-year-old teenager. It was the question of someone with the power to decide Elena's fate at that very moment. Elena took a deep breath, but her breath wasn't steady anymore. Luxury Motors serves customers who are suitable for our premium products. Jordan chuckled lightly, but the laugh was so cold that it sent shivers down the spines of the other employees. So, you decide which customers are suitable based on what? This time, Elena couldn't respond immediately. She couldn't tell the truth, because it would trap her. But she couldn't lie either, because so many people had witnessed how she treated Jordan from the start. David remained silent, but his gaze had never been sharper. Elena felt the entire showroom was focused on her, and she could no longer avoid it. Finally, David broke the silence, but his voice wasn't raised. It was low enough for those who listened to feel the power behind it. Miss Whitmore. Elena swallowed hard, unable to look him directly in the eyes anymore. How long have you worked here? He asked. Almost 10 years, Elena replied, her voice trembling slightly. David nodded slowly. I've trusted you with this showroom for 10 years. Elena could feel sweat forming in her palms. But it seems you've forgotten one very important thing. His voice remained calm, but she could feel the pressure mounting on her. David turned to look at Jordan, his gaze softening a little, but the way he placed his hand on his son's shoulder was a clear statement. Luxury Motors isn't just about selling cars, he said slowly. We sell experiences, we sell respect, we sell trust. Elena's mouth opened slightly, but she couldn't argue. David turned back to her, his voice now even more firm. If you can't understand that, then maybe you shouldn't be working here anymore. The silence in the showroom hit Elena like a punch to her pride. The other employees exchanged shocked glances, some covering their mouths, unable to believe what they had just heard. Elena's face drained of color, her body frozen, as if she couldn't believe what had just happened. Jordan remained still, staring at Elena, but this time, he no longer felt the need to say anything. He had won, and Elena knew it. David's question rang out like a hammer blow, causing the air in the showroom to tighten to the point where it could be sliced with a knife. The surrounding employees held their breath, some quietly stepping back as if they didn't want to get caught up in this event, but no one could take their eyes off the scene unfolding before them. Elena stood frozen. Her lips moved, but no words escaped her mouth. Her eyes flickered rapidly, as if searching for a response that could salvage the situation, but no answer could explain her actions. David remained motionless, no need for further words. His question was powerful enough to expose the entire issue, and Elena's silence spoke volumes. No more excuses, no way out. Elena took a deep breath, trying to maintain the professional demeanor she had built over the years. But everything had crumbled. She was no longer the confident, authoritative manager with cold decisions, no longer the one who could control the showroom like a queen in her kingdom. Now, she was just a small, insignificant person, facing the consequences of the biases she had nurtured for years. She bit her lip, her hands still clutching the clipboard like a lifeline, but nothing could save her from this situation. Her voice was rough, but she was immediately interrupted by Jordan. "Ms. Whitmore, I don't need your apology." His voice wasn't angry, but it was so cold that it felt as though every word pierced through her. "I just want to know one thing." Elena shuddered slightly, her eyes instinctively dropping to the floor, as if she feared facing him. "If today I weren't the son of the dealership owner, if I were just a regular black teenager walking into this showroom, what would happen?" The question echoed in the space, and this time Elena had no escape. She knew the answer, and everyone in the room knew the answer. What would she do? She would treat him like a beggar, someone unworthy of stepping foot in here. She would find a way to get rid of him without wasting any more time or words. She would never think that a black boy could buy a car here, and that thought destroyed her. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Elena still didn't answer. But she didn't need to say anything more. Her silence spoke for everything. David shook his head softly, not in anger, but in deep disappointment. "I trusted you." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a man who had misplaced his trust. "For the past 10 years, I've had you manage this showroom, believing you would help me build it into a place where every customer would be treated with respect." He paused for a moment, his gaze still fixed on Elena. "But it seems I was wrong." Those words were like an irrefutable sentence. Elena opened her mouth, as if wanting to protest, but she couldn't find any words that could save the situation. Because the truth was too clear. Jordan looked directly at Elena, this time without challenge, without anger, only cold disappointment. "You made your judgment the moment you saw me," he said slowly, each word falling like hammer blows to her dignity. "Now it's time for others to make their judgment about you." David nodded slightly, as if agreeing with what his son had just said. "Miss Whitmore," he spoke, his voice carrying an absolute indifference. "Starting today, you no longer work here." The declaration struck like thunder on a clear day. A few employees gasped. Others looked at each other, as if they couldn't believe what they had just heard. Elena could no longer stand. She stumbled slightly, her eyes wide open as if someone had just pushed her into a deep abyss. "Mr. Carter, Her voice trembled, panicked, but David had already turned his back, as if he no longer wanted to hear anything from her. Elena stood there, alone, isolated in a room full of people. No one came to help her. No one spoke in her defense. No one felt she deserved pity. Jordan remained standing, looking at her one last time, but this time with no interest left. He had reclaimed fairness for himself, but more importantly, he knew no one else would ever have to endure the discrimination from Elena again. He didn't need to do anything more. Elena Whitmore had destroyed herself. Elena stood frozen, her hands gripping the clipboard as if it were the only lifeline holding her to reality. But no matter how hard she clung to anything, the truth remained unchanged. She had been fired, and there was no way to fix it. David Carter no longer looked at her. He turned away, his sharp eyes scanning every employee in the showroom, as if assessing each one, determining if there were any others who shared Elena's mindset. "I don't want a dealership where customers are judged by their skin color or what they're wearing." His voice wasn't loud, but each word echoed strongly, reverberating through everyone present in the showroom. The employees standing nearby swallowed nervously, some exchanging anxious glances, but no one dared to speak out. They knew Mr. Carter didn't just talk for the sake of it. David crossed his arms in front of his chest and continued, "Starting today, I will implement a new training program on fairness and professionalism in customer service. If anyone feels they cannot abide by this principle, the door is over there." Everyone turned their heads toward the front door, where Elena stood, completely isolated from the rest of the showroom. She could clearly feel the eyes of everyone on her, but there was no respect or admiration left in their gazes. Now, they only looked at her with disdain and indifference, as if she had never been an important part of this dealership. Elena trembled slightly, but no one came to her aid. No one wanted to stand by her side anymore. She had destroyed everything with her own arrogance. Anyone who has a problem with this, speak up now. David Carter scanned the room, his voice steady yet full of authority. No one dared to utter a word. Some employees looked uneasy, but no one had the courage to protest directly. They knew that if they spoke up now, they might be the next ones to walk out that door without ever returning. Jordan watched all of this with quiet satisfaction. He knew for sure there would still be people like Elena, those who carried hidden biases, but at least from now on they wouldn't dare to show it so openly. David nodded, pleased to see no one opposing him. "Good," he said firmly, his gaze becoming colder as he turned to look at Elena one last time. "Now, leave my showroom." Elena took a deep breath, as if she wanted to say something, but she knew that no words could change this situation. She looked around, searching for a familiar face, an ally, someone who would speak up to defend her. But no one did. The employees who had once praised her, who had respected her power, now stood silently as she left. A few turned away, pretending to be busy with paperwork or computer screens. Others simply stood still, not wanting to get involved. They knew she deserved this, and Elena knew it too. She took a step back, then another, her hand gripping the clipboard so tightly that her knuckles turned white. But then, with one final effort to preserve what little dignity she had left, she lifted her head high, flicked her hair back, and turned to walk away. No one stopped her. No one said goodbye. The showroom door closed behind her, and Elena Whitmore was no longer a part of Luxury Motors. The atmosphere in the showroom remained tense, but now there was a clear shift. David Carter turned back to face his employees, his gaze sharp but also carrying an unshakable resolve. "I don't expect change overnight," he said, his tone stern but no longer angry. "But I expect effort." Everyone nodded, this time not out of fear, but because they knew Mr. Carter was serious. Jordan felt a quiet pride in his heart as he saw this. Not only had he fought for his own fairness, but he had laid the groundwork for real change. But he still had one more thing to do. He turned to his father, his eyes full of meaning. "So, can I look at the cars now without anyone doubting me?" David chuckled softly, shaking his head slightly. "Let's go, son. We've got a car to choose." The showroom began to move again, but things were no longer the same. The employees who had once hesitated now stood straighter, looking more serious. They knew it was time for change, that Luxury Motors would no longer be a place where discrimination could exist in silence. Jordan walked toward the line of sports cars, and this time there was no hindrance. He reached out to touch a sleek coupe, and this time no one stopped him, no one judged him. It was just him, and his own choice. A small smile appeared on Jordan's lips. This was how things should have gone from the start, and he knew that from now on, every customer who walked into this showroom would have the same opportunity as he did, a fair chance, free from prejudice. A new beginning had been written right here. Elena stood frozen, the feeling of humiliation wrapping around her like an invisible net she couldn't escape. Once, she was the one who decided who deserved to buy a car, who was a potential customer, and who was worthy of service. But now, that role had been completely reversed. She was no longer the one with the power to choose. Now, Jordan was the one who had the right to decide. He no longer looked at Elena as though she had become an insignificant part of the scene. He walked toward a young sales associate standing nearby, looking slightly awkward, but his eyes held none of the contempt Jordan had seen in Elena. "I want to work with him instead of you." Jordan's voice was calm, not a trace of bitterness, but each word carried weight, like a clear declaration of who could be trusted and who couldn't. The young sales associate, a guy around 25 with slightly messy brown hair and a simple suit, was clearly caught off guard. Chris, the name on his badge, blinked a couple of times, then quickly nodded, realizing he had just been given the opportunity. "Sure, I'd be happy to help you, sir," he said, his tone more confident after a brief moment of hesitation, as if he understood the seriousness of the situation. Elena had no choice but to stand still, acutely feeling the loss of the power she once held tightly in her hands. She used to easily judge anyone who walked through that door. But now, she was just an outsider, left behind. The other employees exchanged looks. None of them said a word, but they all understood what was happening. Jordan Carter had just asserted his position, not just with Elena, but with the entire showroom. Chris stepped closer to Jordan, trying to maintain a professional demeanor, but it was clear he too felt the pressure. Not from fear, but because he understood that all eyes in the showroom were on this exchange. "Do you have a particular model in mind, sir?" Chris asked, his tone slightly more polite than usual, as if trying to ensure he didn't make the same mistake Elena had. Jordan glanced over the line of cars, no longer feeling uncomfortable, no longer being watched with judging eyes. He walked toward the shiny silver sports car he had touched earlier, the car that had become the focal point of the debate since he stepped into the showroom. He placed his hand on the door handle, and this time, no one stopped him. There were no reminders that he needed supervision, no glaring looks from Elena, no signs showing he wasn't allowed to be there. For the first time since entering this showroom, Jordan was truly being treated as a customer. He smiled slightly, then turned to Chris. "I'd like to see the interior." Chris nodded quickly, pulled the keys from the counter, and pressed the unlock button. The car door opened, revealing an interior with high-quality leather upholstery, a modern dashboard, and a sleek sports steering wheel. Jordan sat in the driver's seat, feeling the softness of the leather, his hand gently gliding over the steering wheel, inhaling the fresh car scent. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Chris began to explain the car's features, from the engine to the driving assistance technologies to the safety system. But Jordan wasn't really focusing on those words. He didn't need anyone to convince him that he deserved to be there anymore. He had proven that to himself. While Jordan and Chris discussed the car, Helena remained standing there, completely forgotten. No one spoke to her. No one looked at her. Even the other employees who had once listened to every order she gave now avoided her like a shadow. She had become a non-entity in that showroom. She bit her lip, feeling her pride being crushed piece by piece. She had once been the one who decided who deserved to step into that showroom, but now she was just someone pushed aside, ignored by everyone. And that hurt more than being fired. With nothing left to lose, Helena turned and walked out of the showroom without a word. This time, no one bothered to look after her. David Carter watched from a distance, observing everything, and when he saw Elena leave, he gave a slight nod, as if he had decisively cut a rotten tumor from his showroom. He didn't need to say anything more. Jordan had handled everything on his own. Jordan stepped out of the car, looking at his father, his eyes filled with quiet pride. David slowly walked over and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You did well." His voice wasn't loud, but Jordan knew it was genuine recognition. He nodded slightly, not needing to say anything more. Power doesn't lie in judging others based on appearances. It lies in proving your worth without having to shout for recognition. Today, Jordan had asserted his place, not through wealth, but through who he was. And he knew that from now on, anyone who walked into that showroom would be given a fair chance, no longer held back by prejudice. The change had begun, and it would continue. 3 days later, Jordan returned to the dealership, but this time everything had completely changed. As soon as he entered the showroom, there were no more scrutinizing glances, no more judgment from the first look. No one stopped to stare at his hoodie, no one whispered behind his back, and there were no expressions suggesting that he didn't belong there. The atmosphere in the showroom was more relaxed, more professional, but above all, there was a respect that hadn't existed before. Jordan immediately noticed the difference. As he walked past rows of cars, he happened to spot a middle-aged black man walking in, dressed simply in a polo shirt and jeans. Last time, someone like him would have been instantly judged by Elena or one of the other staff members. But this time, a young employee quickly approached, offering a professional smile and greeting him like any other customer. "Hello, sir. How can I assist you today?" The employee's tone was sincere, with no hesitation or bias. Jordan stood still for a moment, taking in the scene before him with a strange feeling. A week ago, this wouldn't have happened. But now, Luxury Motors had changed. Continuing towards the reception desk, Jordan spotted a familiar face, Elena Whitmore. But this time, she wasn't standing in her powerful management position like before. No sharp suit, no clipboard in hand as if she was the one in control of life and death in the showroom. She was standing at the receptionist's desk. Jordan raised an eyebrow, a look of surprise briefly crossing his face. Elena Whitmore, who had once seen him as someone unworthy of being in the showroom, was now there to greet him as a valued customer. And the most surprising thing wasn't her position, but the smile on Elena's face when she saw him. It was no longer a forced smile, no longer reluctant, no longer filled with the arrogance it once held. It was genuine. "Welcome back, Jordan." Her voice was gentle, without a hint of disdain. "How can I assist you today?" Jordan didn't answer immediately. He studied her carefully, searching for any signs of insincerity, any hint that she was only doing this because she had to. But there was none. Elena had truly changed, and that was what surprised Jordan more than anything else. "I'm here to complete the purchase for the car I chose," he replied calmly, but his eyes were still fixed on her. Elena nodded, quickly checking the details, then politely invited Jordan to the paperwork area. He followed her, but still couldn't help but wonder, what happened? Jordan wasn't the only one wondering. When news of the confrontation between Jordan, David Carter, and Elena spread throughout the showroom, everyone assumed Elena would disappear for good. And in fact, she did disappear, but not in the way everyone thought. David didn't fire her immediately. Instead, he gave her a chance, but not a chance to continue as a manager. He demoted her to the position of receptionist, showing her what it was like to welcome every customer with respect, not judging anyone by their appearance. If she truly wanted to make amends, this was her only opportunity. If she refused to change, the door out of the showroom would always be wide open. And somehow, Elena chose to stay. Jordan and Elena sat across from each other in the paperwork area. She slowly placed the documents in front of him, then looked up at him, for the first time without the gaze of someone who once thought they were superior. "I owe you an apology." Jordan had predicted she would say this, but he still felt a little strange hearing it from Elena's mouth. He didn't say anything, just sat quietly, waiting to see what she would say next. Elena took a deep breath, as if this wasn't easy for her, but then she spoke the truth. "I was wrong. Not just with you, but with many others. I've spent my career believing I had the right to decide who deserved what and who didn't." She paused, her eyes pained, but no longer avoiding it. "I didn't think I'd lose everything just because of one mistake," she said, a bitter smile appearing on her lips. "But when Mr. Carter made that decision, I realized I had no choice but to change." Jordan slowly nodded, but he wasn't quick to accept her apology. "So, have you changed?" Elena remained silent for a moment, then gently nodded. "I'm trying." Jordan looked at Elena for a long time, then he bent down and signed the car purchase papers she handed him. When he looked up, his gaze held no hostility but also no immediate empathy. "I don't know if you've truly changed, but I do know one thing." Elena blinked, as if waiting for the final judgment. "You may have lost your position, but you still have the chance to make things right," Jordan said slowly, then pushed the paperwork back toward her. "You should take it." Elena slightly pursed her lips, then nodded faintly. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice for the first time completely sincere. Jordan didn't say anything else. He simply stood up, took the keys to his new car, and walked out of the showroom. This time, there were no judgmental glances following him, only an open space ahead, and the road he had chosen for himself. Stepping out of the showroom, Jordan tightened the car key in his hand, feeling the cold metal press against his skin. A feeling of both satisfaction and depth lingered in his chest. He had changed something. Not the complete eradication of discrimination. That can't happen in a day, a week, or even a year, but he had made a significant push, an imprint, a crack in the invisible wall of prejudice that had stood firm in this world for so long. For the first time, someone in this system had to take responsibility. For the first time, someone like Elena couldn't walk away with her head held high without reflecting on what she had done. And for the first time, a black teenager like him walked out of a luxury car showroom without feeling like an outsider. Luxury motors would never be the same again. Jordan paused for a moment, looking through the showroom's clear glass. Inside, everything was still running as usual. Customers checking out cars, salespeople advising, discussions happening around contract tables. But there was no longer the tension that had been present the first time he walked in. He saw Chris, the one who had helped him with the car purchase, assisting a middle-aged black man with a premium sedan. From a distance, Jordan could see the clear difference. No longer the doubtful gaze, no more distant attitude, no suggestion to steer the customer toward the used car section. Just simply a salesperson advising a regular customer, just as it should always have been. He couldn't help but smile slightly. Jordan shifted his gaze to the reception area, where Elena was greeting an older couple. She stood upright, her face no longer carrying the arrogance it once did, but instead showing a professional demeanor, not cold, but composed. When the customer asked about a car model, she didn't scrutinize or judge, simply leading them to the display area. No more subtle preference for customers who appeared wealthier. No more prejudiced looks. Had Elena really changed? Jordan wasn't sure. The thoughts ingrained in a person don't disappear overnight. But he knew one thing. She was trying. And for Jordan, that was a victory. A familiar voice pulled him out of his thoughts. "Ready, son?" David Carter stood not far away, arms crossed, his gaze both proud and contemplative. Jordan nodded, raising the key with pride, but without any showiness. Ready? David studied his son for a moment, then nodded, a warm smile spreading across his face. You've done something not many people would dare to do, he said, his voice steady but carrying a deep weight. You didn't just buy a car. You left a lesson for everyone in that room. Jordan shrugged, but he didn't deny it. He felt it. I just wanted to be treated like a regular person, he said, his voice soft but sure, and I wanted others to have that chance too. David nodded, his hand giving a gentle pat on his son's shoulder. You've done more than that. Jordan opened the door to the new car and sat in the driver's seat. This time, there was no one supervising, no one doubting him. He had earned his place, and he'd earned it justly. But as he looked at the steering wheel, another thought suddenly flashed in his mind. This story isn't just about me. If he could create change in just one showroom, how many other places needed that kind of change? He gripped the steering wheel lightly, then looked over at his father through the window. Hey, Dad. He spoke up. David paused, waiting for his son to continue. I want to do more than this. David raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What do you mean? Jordan took a deep breath, his eyes flashing with a new sense of determination. Luxury Motors isn't the only showroom with problems, he said slowly. There are hundreds of places like this where people are judged just by their skin color, by the way they dress, by baseless prejudices. David chuckled softly, but it wasn't a mocking laugh. It was the smile of someone who could see the path his son was choosing. So, what are you going to do? He asked, his voice both challenging and encouraging. Jordan looked out at the road ahead, his eyes filled with resolve. I'll find a way to change that. And in that moment, Jordan Carter was no longer just a teenager buying his first car. He had become someone with a mission. After Jordan left with his new car, David Carter didn't waste any time. He knew that if real change was going to happen, it had to start from within. The next morning, all the staff at Luxury Motors were called into the showroom's large meeting room. The staff could feel the seriousness of the situation. There were no scattered conversations, and no one dared to slack off. They understood that this was not a typical meeting. It was a statement about how Luxury Motors would operate from then on. David stood in front of the room, his gaze sweeping across each person. No one dared to avoid his eyes. The way we treat our customers is more important than any car we have here. His voice was steady, but carried an undeniable weight. No one spoke, but everyone knew what he was referring to. The incident between Jordan and Elena had become a clear lesson, a reminder that prejudice can destroy the reputation of an entire organization, no matter how large or successful it is. David took a deep breath and continued, his voice no longer filled with anger, but with true disappointment. I built this dealership with the goal of creating a place where everyone could be treated fairly. But what happened? A young customer walks in only to be judged the moment he opened that door. The staff lowered their heads slightly, some looking away. They knew this wasn't just about Jordan. David didn't need to say more about Elena. The fact that she had lost her position and was demoted to receptionist was a clear enough warning. But the issue wasn't just with her. Discrimination wasn't caused by just one person. It was a system, a mindset deeply ingrained in the thoughts of many. And David decided it was time for that to change. David turned his gaze toward Chris, the young staff member who had treated Jordan fairly without passing any hasty judgments. "Chris," he called. Chris jumped slightly but quickly nodded and sat up straight. "Yes, Mr. Carter?" David nodded slowly. "You treated my son like a real customer, without judgment, without discrimination. That's what I expect from everyone here." Chris blushed slightly, but in his eyes there was a quiet sense of pride. David turned back to face the entire meeting room, his voice no longer critical, but a call for change. From now on, luxury motors will no longer be a place where favoritism or prejudice exists. He paused for a moment, letting those words sink in. Then he continued, his voice deep but firm. Every customer who walks into this showroom will be treated with the same respect. No one will be judged by how they dress, the color of their skin, or what car they drive when they come here. A few staff members nodded quietly. Some appeared to be deep in thought. David knew that not everyone would immediately agree with this. But he didn't care about instant consensus. He cared about taking real action. A longtime employee, Larry, a middle-aged man with graying hair, frowned and spoke up. "Mr. Carter, I understand your point, but there are customers who truly can't afford to buy cars here. If we waste time with people who can't financially afford it, we may lose real customers." A few staff members nodded, as if they had thought the same. David didn't get angry, but his gaze grew sharper. "Larry, let me ask you one question. Who gave you the right to decide who a real customer is?" Larry pursed his lips, but couldn't immediately respond. David walked slowly around the room, his voice deep and powerful. "I've met people who walk into this showroom in simple clothes, driving an old car, yet they have enough money to buy any car in this room. I've also met people in expensive suits, but in reality, they don't have enough money to buy a regular car." Larry lowered his head, unable to argue. "We don't have the right to judge who can afford a car or not based on their appearance." David stopped, his gaze filled with absolute seriousness. "But we do have the right to choose how we treat them, and I choose respect." The atmosphere in the meeting room fell into silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was one of realization. The longtime employees began to understand that a new era was being set. The younger employees felt empowered to do what was right, and David ended the meeting with a warning. "If anyone feels they can't work by this principle, I won't hold you here." He looked at each person, his gaze sharp but fair. No one stood up, no one left, because they knew this change was inevitable. After the meeting, the staff dispersed, returning to their work with a new mindset. The receptionists became more focused on welcoming customers professionally, instead of judging them at first glance. The salespeople learned to ask the right questions instead of relying on preconceived biases. And Jordan Carter, the one who had started it all, knew that he had changed something far more important than just buying a car. He had changed the way people viewed the value of a person. And that change would continue to spread, little by little, from this showroom out into the world. Jordan stood beside his new car, feeling the gentle sunlight shining down on the pavement, reflecting off the glossy silver paint. He hadn't left yet. There was something that made him want to stay just a little longer, as if he needed to witness this change for one more moment, to know that it was real. Just as he reached for the car door handle, a familiar voice called out from behind. "Thank you for giving me the opportunity to change." Jordan turned around. Elena Whitmore stood there, no longer holding herself with the pride and control she had on the first day they met. She looked more ordinary, more human. Gone was the mocking smile or the sharp gaze, replaced by a woman who had experienced failure and was now trying to rebuild herself from the ashes of her own mistakes. Jordan didn't answer immediately. He looked at her for a moment, as if assessing whether those words were truly sincere or just another mask she was wearing to survive. But this time, there was no fakeness. Elena shifted slightly, clearly uncomfortable facing Jordan in this way, but she remained still, not retreating. "I lost everything in the blink of an eye," she said, her voice deeper, lacking the usual sharpness. In just one day, I lost my position, the respect of my colleagues, the power I once thought I could hold on to forever. She took a breath and looked directly at Jordan. But what I've thought about the most is not what I lost, but what I never had. Jordan squinted slightly, waiting for her to explain. Elena gave a faint, bitter smile. True respect doesn't come from power or position. It comes from how we treat those around us. Jordan couldn't deny that. Elena smiled softly, but there was no longer any trace of smugness. I've been wrong my whole life. I thought I had the right to decide who was worthy and who wasn't. But you showed me something important. I don't have that right. She took a deep breath and said more clearly than ever before, I'm sorry. Jordan slowly nodded, but he still wore a thoughtful expression. I don't need an apology, he said, his voice not harsh but sharp enough to make Elena pause. I need action. Elena didn't argue. She had learned something. Words weren't enough to fix mistakes. I understand, she replied. Then she took out a small card and handed it to Jordan. This is my number. If you need anything from this showroom, whether it's maintenance or upgrades, I will personally take care of it. Jordan looked at the card in his hand and then back at her. It wasn't an apology, it was a commitment. A way for her to prove that she had truly changed. A way for her to find herself again. Jordan gave a slight nod and slipped the card into his jacket pocket. I'll consider it, he said, making no promises but also not rejecting it. Elena gave a slight bow and turned to walk away, back to her work. This time, with a completely different attitude. Jordan watched her figure for a moment before finally opening the car door and sitting in the driver's seat. The engine hummed softly yet powerfully, reflecting exactly what was happening in his mind. This wasn't just a personal victory. It was a promise that change was possible, if someone truly wanted to change. Jordan tightened his grip on the key in his hand, feeling the cool metal contours press against his skin. This car was more than just a vehicle. It was a symbol of a journey, a confrontation with prejudice, a victory not only for him, but for those who would walk through the showroom doors after him. Today, he wasn't just buying a car, he had proven his worth. As Jordan slowly drove out of the showroom, he couldn't help but notice the gazes of the staff inside. But this time, there was no scrutiny or doubt. He saw Chris near the consultation desk, his eyes full of genuine respect. Not because Jordan was the son of the dealership owner, but because of what he had accomplished. A little further, he saw Elena, once the most arrogant person in the place, now standing silently behind the reception desk, watching him leave. Not with control, but with the quiet stillness of someone learning to change. This time, she was no longer a barrier. She was facing her own past mistakes, and Jordan knew that was a road not easily traveled. But he no longer cared about her. His journey had reached a new chapter. The traffic light turned green, and Jordan gently pressed the gas pedal, feeling the smooth response of the engine beneath his foot. He glanced at the rearview mirror, luxury motors shrinking in the distance behind him, but he knew that what he had done there wouldn't just fade away. Change takes time, but it had already begun. He recalled his last conversation with his father before leaving the showroom. You've done something most people wouldn't dare to do. Jordan knew that was true. But this was only the beginning. He thought about what had happened, not just to him, but to others like him, those who had walked into a showroom, an office, a conference, a place where they weren't welcome just because they didn't meet the expectations of others. How many others were going through something similar? And what could he do to change that? Jordan accelerated, feeling the wind rush through the car window, carrying with it a sense of freedom, strength, and determination. Today's victory was not the final destination. He had seen the power of persistence, of not backing down in the face of injustice. And he knew he couldn't stop here. Luxury Motors was just the starting point. There was a whole world outside waiting for him to make even greater changes. Jordan gripped the steering wheel, the corners of his lips slightly turning up. The real journey had just begun. Jordan Carter began the morning with the simple goal of buying a car, but he ended the day with a much bigger victory. He not only proved that a person's worth cannot be judged by their appearance, but also created real change. A change that could spread not just within the showroom, but throughout society. But this story wasn't just about him. It's a reminder that prejudice can exist anywhere, and only when someone is brave enough to stand up can we break it. So, what do you think? If you were in Jordan's shoes, would you have the patience to face it and change it? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to spread more positive messages together. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next stories.